Let's make a video. So I really like the, oh, why'd you make a noise? Why'd you make a noise if you were still recording? Anyway, I want to make a video that's not super high quality, not super edited, researched, written, voiced over. Those just take way too long to produce. And when I had started, I didn't have so much going on, but now I kind of have to either adjust or hey, just abandon it altogether. And I do not want to abandon this channel specifically because I have a very ambitious goal in mind, right? And it relates to what we're talking about today. So everybody makes collecting about the hype, right? Right now the Pokemon sets are going insane, and people are going insane over it. The issue I've found is that the Lego sphere is all about reaction to current topic, right? It is, and when we want to know something about something previously, we just look it up and take the first answer on faith, right? Say I want to know about this set, right? This is the SAS promotional set. There's only one source that has ever written on it. Gary Istock, the Lego historian, he wrote the unofficial Parts and Sets Collector's Guide, right? And he dates this set to somewhere around 1964, just because it's similar to a box style, or a box, or another version of the set, I guess, that definitively dates to 1964. The issue is that what he's written about this set is entirely guesswork, right? Nobody has identified anything about this set beyond what you could tell on the surface, which is it's a airline promotional set, which I think is very interesting, right? And so these are things that I look into, and I think it's just a better way to go about collecting, right? Is that you're not collecting things to have them and put them on a shelf or something, right? You're collecting a thing to understand it, right? So say, for example, this is a 702 tall box, right? This was released in 1961 for the US market. It has a fascinating history, and I don't want to go over it just too much yet. This is a US version, and my example is incomplete, but they all would have had this topper here, and this is a later version. So for 1961, 1962, there's not really a good clear line there. The set did not have very small text and the patent text on it, right? And there's no way I can just show that to you. But this is a later version, probably around 1962 to 1965. And I think it's a lot more interesting to be able to understand a collection in terms of how it stands in history, right? And not only understand things as they were, but understand kind of nuances and mysteries that nobody has explored yet, right? So take, for example, the SAS set. This is just something nobody's looked into. A lot of people just buy it, collect it, look it up online, and if nothing exists or something exists, they just take that on faith. And I just think it's so fascinating to be able to, what do you call it? To take a topic that you're interested in, right? And not just participate in it, but to contribute to it in a way, right? And obviously, research into something like Lego Samsonite, it is incredibly prone to error, right? And a lot of research requires a lot of knowledge of not only what you should be saying, but also what you can't say, right? And I'm guilty of it myself, and even Gary Istock is prone to it. I'd like to make a video eventually about kind of factual errors in his guide, and it's not like, oh, you said this set wasn't released in a country, but here's the set that was released in the no. I'm much more interested in kind of finding answers to questions that have never been asked, right? And I just think that's a better, healthier way to go about collecting, right? Is to not worry yourself so much about the chase, about rarity, about value, about, you know, having a full collection. I would really encourage you to participate in the history of these items, right? To kind of think about them in the context that they existed in, right? I'm surprised that collectors and, I don't know, hobbyists are not more interested in the history of what they collect. I just think it's a more rewarding kind of process, right? Wherein you're kind of, you know, you don't look at a set and you're like, okay, well, that, according to online, that released in 1961. You're going in and you're gathering the information and you're confirming it for yourself, right? And that's kind of the philosophy behind the archive I run. So I run an archive for Samsonite, right? I have a bunch of Samsonite ads right here that I'm digitizing right now and putting metadata into. But what my goal is to completely document these sets that maybe not everybody has access to. I want everybody to see every dimension of the box in full quality, with no watermarks, no cropping, no weird colors, just the box in full quality for anybody to use. Genuinely, I would say that this shift into, I've not really talked about collecting, right? I don't mean to be like a Debbie Downer or anything. I think we all know the pitfalls of collecting and how it can be dangerous, how it can be, you know, beneficial. You are spending money to acquire these things. I'm not saying when you switch to historical research that you no longer spend money, right? You may even spend more money depending on your personality. But I think you'd find more inherent value, if it makes sense. So I've never really collected. I don't really know how much backstory is necessary. I got really bad collecting bug in a couple years ago, right? Where I would just buy everything that I saw. I bought every theme, every era, everything I found interesting, right? Which is what you're supposed to be doing when you collect. But the issue that I ran into was not only did I have no money because I was a teenager, but essentially I was stuck in a loop wherein I would just be buying things forever. And so I focused down to Lego Samsonite. And I've just been kind of collecting that. And the main reason why I originally started collecting this stuff is that I found it very interesting, right? Not only is it something that not many people collect, so it's insanely cheap. Not only should you pivot your collecting, but you should study something, pivot into something that interests you that is very cheap, right? Everybody wants Pokemon, everybody wants Lego Star Wars, right? You know, it's interesting to have things that people are familiar with and they're familiar with their rarity, and that, you know, you've been able to acquire so many of them or something, right? But I don't know, man. That just kind of gets superficial after a while. Um, or and you may be legitimately interested in that kind of stuff, but push comes to shove, it's a chase between your money and somebody else's money, and there's always somebody with a deeper pocket, and so you kind of chase yourself down into a hole. That's why I started collecting Lego Samsonite and Samsonite in general. Is that for the most part, nobody's really buying this stuff, right? Now the fringe, very rare stuff that kind of goes for a couple hundred, but almost nothing it goes over $1,000, right? Which is crazy, right? You have these sets, these white whale sets that everybody wants, at least in the Samsonite sphere, and they go for maybe $900. Insane. Versus Star Wars sets, you have the white whale sets like the Cloud City that goes for 10 grand. No, thank you. So I kind of just want to make this video about collecting for yourself in a way that doesn't financially bankrupt you, right? And the way I've been able to do that is through historical research. I feel like this video has no structure, you know what I mean? But the point of this is that no longer am I collecting things to have them, to have boxes, right? To have pamphlets, and then just keep them in a box, that's where they stay. I very much enjoy the aspect of research and sharing and kind of collaborating in order to find things out. This is a very bad example that I reached for just now. Not only am I interested in that kind of research wherein you're going through sources and you're going through contemporary information and your newspapers, magazines, catalogs, studying these things as they are. I got a good example. Well, I might have had a good example. This is hard to get to. My recording setup is not made for this. Okay. So this is my example I'm going to bring to the class today. This is the 005 Discovery set. If you read about it online, it'll say it's a Discovery it's an FAO Schwarz exclusive set, right? So let me bring my second item to the class. This is a Christmas 1968 Bon March catalog, right? And let's go to the toys. I feel like I just passed it. I wish I would have planned this out. Well, there's something in here that I just noticed recently regarding Samsonite, but there's no time for that. So remember our 005 Discovery set, according to the internet, is an FAO Schwarz exclusive, which was the premier toy store for the United States, right? But what is that in the Bon March catalog? What is that? Is that the 005 Discovery set right there? That's crazy. And so what I've been doing is that I've been grabbing all the mentions of the 005 in catalogs, magazines, newspapers, etc. And I've been able to compile a list of about 20 retailers where it appears. Now, did it sell at all those retailers? Is there a possibility one of the ads is maybe wrong? Yeah, but for the most part, 99%, I'm 99.999% sure it sold at 90 or 100% of those retailers. And if one or two of them ended up being not true, that doesn't matter. If one or two of them ended up not being reflective of what they actually sold, there's no way for me to know that. But it evidently wasn't FAO Schwarz exclusive, right? And so I take a lot of pride in being able to understand things as they existed and not as people have interpreted them, right? That's not saying that you shouldn't trust anything that anyone has ever written or said ever, right? We just don't have the time to research everything that we ever want to know. It's just that for things that you collect, right? You can find these anywhere. And they're super cheap. There's one on Macari for like $20, free shipping. So I don't know why I mentioned that, but I think it's fascinating to people understand these things in a context that is more reflective of reality than maybe you would have gotten just trusting internet sources, right? And maybe you do that kind of research and you find that they were correct after all. That's bound to happen, but I think it's much more interesting to kind of do that dive yourself, and even something that's not documented, just to kind of go into it with the goal of understanding it, right? And that's only one facet of what I'm interested in. I'm also very interested in archival work, right? I want not only to understand these sets, but I want everyone else to see my own research, to follow my methods, to understand what I've done, to arrive at a certain answer, right? So that you don't have to take an answer on faith anymore. You can look into it, you can see exactly what evidence I've used, as well as, you know, other sources that exist. I think that level of historical research is non-existent for hobbyist research, right? A lot of what you see online it's just people declaring stuff that they don't know is true. But when you defend it with a lot of evidence, it becomes a lot stronger than what was asserted without evidence behind it, or with very little evidence behind it, or misled evidence behind it. And that's kind of why you have to be careful with what you do and how you choose to go about it. I've made several mistakes along the way. There are still things that I really want to correct and kind of introduce nuance to. But because it's never as simple as what it is, right? It's like the opposite of Occam's razor. It's that you can whittle something down with nuance, so it's almost meaningless. You know what I mean? It's that meme where you are asking somebody, well, what does God mean? What does belief mean? You know, what does it mean to believe in something? What does what mean? You know. So you can kind of get lost in the sauce a bit, as well as you can misinterpret evidence. But you'll become a better and better researcher as you go along, and you'll become more familiar with things. One thing that I kind of wasn't familiar with in the beginning was newspapers, right? I'm a young guy, so newspapers are completely out of my wheelhouse. Even magazines, I'm not very familiar with them. Just didn't grow up with them. So understanding how they existed in a cultural context, how they were prepared, how they were presented, how people interpreted them, I think there's a lot of value there, right? Not only for yourself and kind of developing skills for yourself, but in kind of contributing to a realm. And that's kind of what I wanted to do with Lego, right? There is really no community for historical research of Lego, right? There are people that are interested in it, no doubt, right? The issue is that historical research for Lego comprises of observational, right? So you see something, oh, that part didn't exist until this year, this set must belong to that year, right? But you find things that maybe not everybody has figured out, or maybe nobody has figured out, right? I guarantee in anything that you are interested in. There is something that is under-researched, poorly researched, under-documented, no documentation, right? Meaning no materials are out there. And that's something that you could do, right? Right now, I'm in the middle of digitizing magazines for Samsonite. I've got over 100 of them right here. And what I pride myself in is not only making something available, but able to give people free access to these resources that need them. Because a lot of collecting, right? It's turned into something where you kind of hoard it. I'm not saying that in like a negative way. It's just that you buy something and you don't really check to see if it's something that... There's a paper falling in my room. It's embarrassing. But you buy something and you don't really check that if it's available or not, right? There's a billion examples for Samsonite. But there's a lot of Lego history that is simply not online, accessible for people to access. So just recently I got this Danish catalog from 1971. These things, I don't think this is online for people to access. And if it's not to the point where I can easily search it up. It would take hours and maybe hours upon hours to find something like this. Of course, somebody scanned the front of it and put it on Brickset or Bricklink, but that is almost no help, right? Because a lot of these things you can't just go out and buy. You have to wait for somebody to sell them, and they're often very hard to attain. That's the issue with a lot of Canadian materials for Samsonite, is that you just can't get it, right? And so in that way, my research has been stunted. But I've had generous offers from Canadians to kind of help me through that. It's just slow because volunteer work. So I think genuinely, for something you're interested in, there is something that you can do about it, right? Not just collect it, not just have it, but to take it and, take a picture of every side of the box and share it, and share it in high quality so that, things are legible, accessible to people for generations. We only have to digitize these things once for them to be accessible. And you might say like, oh, well, but what about set instructions, right? Aren't those like, I can just look those up right now for any set. That's not true. And even if it is true for whatever set you imagine right now, I can think of plenty of examples where they are online, but they're in terrible quality. They've been passed around for God knows how many years. They're cropped to death, and they're out of order, so they've not been curated. And I think we as a community can do a lot better than to collect things for ourselves, right? You look at the lost media community, how they spend hours upon hours upon hours looking into things and trying to find a single minute of video. And they buy all these VHS tapes to try to find something that's missing. And a lot of things in Lego are lost media that are not archived online for people to access, for researchers to access. I know people, it's like Lego research isn't really a thing. I get that. But genuinely having access to things that are not easily accessible online can be helpful for anybody, right? It's just kind of a disappointing reality that we live in, right? Wherein, I'm not trying to tell you how to live your life, right? But it's that people are more interested in collecting something and then taking somebody's word at face value. and not valuing proper attribution, right? And that's kind of where I get into what I want to do, is that I think there is a community out there that's just waiting to be made of Lego collectors to digitize materials that aren't accessible, to create something where it's like a digital reference archive wherein you can look up any set. Say you're looking up the what do I want to do? Say you're looking up one of these basic sets, right? And so you can see it in a catalog. You can see every appearance it ever had. At least it's documented. And you can do that research yourself. That kind of research right now is extremely hard to do on your own. And it takes a lot of dedication, patience, and I don't know, insanity almost, to kind of spend that amount of time compiling resources and making it freely available. But I think I've grown to understand things a lot better than people who maybe have not done that. I don't mean to sound that like egotistical or anything. It's just that through interacting with these materials, with critical thinking through everything, I've been able to say a lot more than I don't know, right? So, for example, I don't want to keep just grabbing things from here because I feel like that feels like it's planned. Let's do... Ooh. Actually, I'm going to grab something from here. I think this is interesting. And I hope you do too. Oh god, things are falling. Oh, that's a shame. Okay. Let's talk about this, right? This is a plain box for an 002 motor pack, right? And what's interesting about this one is that Brick Trains has one of these boxes with a Sears stamp on it, right? And it even came with, I think it's like a Sears receipt or something. But mine has a shipping label from Imaginations Inc. And I've found the Imaginations Inc. catalog that goes with that. And I've scanned it and I put it online for the first time ever. And so for 1965, the only year it appears in the Sears catalog, this sold at Sears. But for 1966, this sold through Imaginations Inc. You know, whether or not it didn't sell well at Sears or they produced too many, there's room for interpretation there, but we just don't know, right? But to be able to pick up something like that and to have a nuanced approach wherein I can understand more about this, and you know, I'd have to look at it, but I think this reappears in the 1967 catalog for Imaginations Inc. I think so. Whether or not it came in this box, I assume it came in this box again because it's just it's a mailing box and they already had it made and designed and stuff. But to be able to understand these things as you collect them and to be able to pick something up and say 1970 mini wheel model maker, first year they made the mini wheel. To be able to understand things as they were, and kind of understand the nuances. Now, I realize that there's some argument for things that I've found, and I'm not saying that I know everything that ever happened, right? This is just what I believe and what I've reasoned and what I've argued for, based on the evidence. I don't want to create false information. I want to reflect reality, and reality, there's usually only one answer, right? This set cannot be FAO Schwarz exclusive and have sold somewhere else, right? We have to understand things as and we have to, how do I say this? We have to place things in the correct spots, right? And correct has a weird definition. And I know I just made fun of people for defining things really weird, but in something like this, there'll never be like a guidebook for this, right? Wherein somebody from the time kind of comes out and like, here's everything that happens in order, in alphabetical order, and that was right, that was right, that was wrong, that was right. And that's never going to happen. We are left to pick up pieces of a broken empire, which I'm sure I got that from somewhere, but that does not mean we're stuck without recourse, right? There are ways we can know things. That's kind of how we study history before it was recorded, and even fragmentary history, ancient civilizations, right? You find the physical evidence, you find contemporary items, articles, etc., and you kind of form a story that is supported by evidence. The fortunate thing about mid-century kind of history is that there's so much information out there that you don't really have to go out, that you're not really stuck without answers for very long about many topics, right? There are obviously things that you can just never know too much about, such as the SAS promotion right there. There'll likely never be a a source that just says, yeah, it's released in this date. So we're kind of stuck with what we're left with, right? And I find to say, I don't know, or to kind of just point to whatever somebody else says online and say that's just the answer, I think we can do a little better than that, right? We can check work of somebody, and if I find something that contradicts that, I think it's very compelling that maybe we need to look back at this, right? And to be able to do that is very valuable.